What is going on, everybody? I am back today to give you guys a list video, and I wanted to do a couple of lists this month because it is Women's History Month, and I think it's so important when months like this come along to really highlight achievements, especially of women this month, because in an industry that has existed for a very long time, that it has been incredibly difficult for women and marginalized groups to succeed without working excessively harder than their male counterparts. I think it is very important for people who review movies and who talk about film to highlight those achievements and appreciate those achievements in one way or another, and to celebrate the achievements of all women, including different races, backgrounds, identities, orientations. It's important to be all inclusive in those manners. And I'm always in my own life trying to explore art from all different backgrounds and all different walks of life. And I think it's incredibly important for us as people who enjoy and love art to experience art from people that have different experiences than ours, because you learn from that. And I have been touched by so many films that women have directed. And I just thought that it would be cool today to highlight some of my favorite movies directed by women this decade. So we're keeping it from 2020 until the present, because I could go back even further. This list could go on for an eternity, but I thought it would be fun to highlight films from this decade to give you guys something very recent and possibly highlight some movies that you haven't seen and possibly some that you have, and just talk about a few of them today. And I have a list of about 20, so it's a relatively long list. So I'm going to try to rapid fire give you little bits and pieces of information to hopefully get you to want to check some of these movies out. So without further ado, let's get into it right now. So first up is going to be the film Shiva Baby from director Emma Seligman. This stars Rachel Sennett, who gives a brilliant performance in this. It's a very tight, confined, anxiety-inducing movie that's also incredibly hilarious, that all surrounds the idea of identity and your purpose in life and familial pressure. It's truly hilarious, but it's also very heartfelt. I did not stop thinking about this movie after I watched it the first time. Emma Seligman is an incredibly talented director who I'm really looking forward to seeing more works from in the future. This is just a really great movie. Up next is the film Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always from director Eliza Hittman. And this is about a young girl who gets pregnant and she wants to have an abortion, but where she lives, she is not legally able to obtain an abortion. And so her and her friend travel to New York City to try to get the procedure done. This movie is incredible. It's very much realistic slice of life and very poignant to the current political state that we're living in now, where so many states are actively trying to take away the rights of women that they have over their own bodily autonomy. And I thought this movie just really spoke volumes to the experience of so many people. It was very raw and authentic. I really liked the scenes that played out in the different clinics that they visited, because I felt like that they were paralleled to real life experience and kind of like defeated the stigma surrounding abortion and the way that a lot of conservative Christians view abortion. And hopefully this movie gets out there to some people and changes their perspectives in the way they think, because abortion rights are so incredibly important, and women should have the access to be able to choose to have an abortion if they want to. And I'm really glad that this movie exists. Up next is Emma from director Autumn de Wilde. I loved this movie. It is a period piece starring Anya Taylor-Joy and Mia Goth. Anya Taylor-Joy honestly gave one of my favorite performances in the decade in this movie. She's whimsical, she's funny, she's charming, she's charismatic. Everything that I love about her as an actress. The attention to detail and the costume design in this movie is absolutely brilliant. I loved it so much. It's witty and fun and just super easy and breezy for its runtime. And it's everything I love about a period piece drama. And I think if any of that sounds interesting to you, you'll really enjoy Emma. Up next is Petite Maman from director Celine Sciamma, one of my favorite directors of all time. This is almost like a Celine Sciamma fairy tale. It is about a young girl who is helping her parents while they clean out her grandmother's house after she's recently passed away. And she goes into the woods and meets this young girl, and the two of them strike up an unlikely friendship. This movie is beautiful. It's heart-wrenching. It is all about family and the relationship between a mother and daughter, and reflecting on that relationship, and just family dynamics in general. It's probably Sciamma's most like light-hearted movie. There's still some heavy emotional moments, but it's very easy to invest yourself in. It's like 75 or 80 minutes long, very short runtime. I recommend this movie to virtually everyone. Up next in the complete opposite spectrum is the film Titane from director Julia Ducournau. This is one of the most disturbing, outlandish body horror movies that I've ever seen in my life, that also has some really fantastic symbolic allegory. It is beautifully shot. The performances in this movie are exceptional. It goes a direction in the third act that I never would have predicted in a million years. Just truly a remarkable movie. I'm really glad that it got a lot of praise around the time that it was released, because I can't wait for Julia to make more movies. She is incredibly talented. Up next is the film Aftersun from director Charlotte Wells, one of my favorite films of the decade, a movie about a young girl who goes on vacation with her estranged father, and it is the older version of this girl reflecting on this trip that they had together. The way that it's shot just feels like fragmented memory and piecing together these moments in your life. The character study of the father is just incredible. It's so thought-provoking and moving. This movie had me in tears in the very last 10 minutes because of just how real and authentic the emotion comes across. It's one of the most beautiful looking films of the decade. It's shot so incredibly. The musical choices in this are phenomenal. The two lead performances just keep you hooked to the screen for the entire runtime. And it's a movie that I think about probably once a week, and I always look forward to revisiting it. Up next is the film Causeway from director Lila Neusbauer. This is a film that I don't feel like a lot of people talked about around its release, and I do remember it getting nominated for at least one Academy Award. I think this didn't get talked about a lot because it was released directly on Apple TV+, but it stars Jennifer Lawrence and Brian Tyree Henry about a woman who was serving in the military and who comes back home after she is discharged for an injury that she had, and she's trying to reacclimate herself into society. And it is such an incredibly beautiful and moving and realistic movie about people who go through post-traumatic stress disorder and people who have served in the military and are trying to get their lives back on track, and the struggles that they deal with, and then the immediate relationship between Jennifer Lawrence's character and her family. I just thought that this was such a simple movie on the outside, but there was so much going on in it that you can unpack, so much little nuance. It's truly a brilliant film that I don't feel like a lot of people talk about, and if you've never seen it before, it's 100% worth your time. Up next is Watcher from director Chloe Okuno. This movie was awesome. I love Micah Monroe, and she has become one of my favorite actresses in the horror genre. I feel like she always gives a great performance, and this is everything you could possibly want in a suspense thriller movie. It feels very Hitchcock, not just because the plot is similar to Rear Window, but also in the way that it's shot and the way that it builds character. I feel like you were constantly looking over your shoulder in every second of this movie. There were so many great twists and turns along the way. I would have never guessed the way that the third act panned out, and I just have a ton of fun with this movie, and I always look forward to revisiting it when I get the chance. Up next is the film Past Lives from director Celine Song, a movie that deserves all of the recognition that it gets. This movie has been talked about a ton, but it is probably one of my favorite romances of the decade, and this idea of like, can you find your soulmate at a young age, and what if life puts everything in the way where the two of you can't end up together and life just doesn't work out that way, and if you were meant to just pass each other in life in this very specific moment and be there for each other in this very specific way. It's so very guttural and realistic, and I love that it's not afraid to pull any punches and to examine ideas about relationships that are uncomfortable and that are difficult sometimes. And I just thought that there was so much harsh realism in this movie that a lot of other films surrounding like romance are afraid to tackle. And I think Celine Song really proves what an incredible talent that she is directing this movie, because this was her debut. And I know that she's just recently announced her follow-up, which I cannot wait for. But this movie is remarkable. It's one of my favorite films in all of A24's catalog. And if you haven't seen it before, you're really missing out. Up next is Barbie from Greta Gerwig. I am not going to talk about this movie for a very long time because it's been talked about in so many different ways. This was one of the most fun experiences I've ever had seeing a movie in the theater. I was lucky enough to get to see an early screening of this movie before its initial release, and I couldn't get over just all of the love and care and detail that was put into every single frame of this movie. I loved that there was a movie like this put out there for the general public that speaks on feminism and women in such a very beautiful, raw, and authentic way, despite being a silly, fun, charming comedy in moments as well. There's so many great little attentions to detail throughout the movie that are either full of societal commentary or just meant there to be a little wink and a nod at you as the audience member to get a laugh out of you. And I just really appreciate whenever you can get a movie like this that has such a wide audience appeal that speaks volume to another subject. And that's what I love so much about this, is I think the existence of this movie is so important, not just for young women to see or women in general to see, but all people to see, to showcase the power of women and the importance of women. And I loved that it was such a staple societally uh, when it was first released, and that so many people were impacted by it. It's a movie that I always love seeing clips online and look forward to revisiting it because it's a ton of fun. Up next is the movie Anatomy of a Fall from the director Justine Triet. This movie got nominated for multiple Academy Awards, and it's truly a remarkable piece of work. It's not just a super compelling courtroom drama, but it's also about a marriage, and a marriage that is put in the spotlight of all of these other people. And when people around you don't understand all the nuances of your relationship, how would you be judged? And then when your child is brought into the forefront of that situation, I love this movie because of how important the commentary is on marriage and relationships and dysfunctional relationships. But it's also just a compelling, gripping courtroom thriller that keeps you on the edge of your seat for the entire runtime of the movie. I love this movie a lot. I recommend it to a ton of people, and I think if you've never seen it before, you need to check it out. Up next is Priscilla from director Sofia Coppola. I absolutely adored this movie. This is probably one of my favorite films in all of Sofia's catalog. I thought Kaylee Spaney's performance as Priscilla Presley was remarkable, and it's such an interesting character study because throughout the years, we've gotten so many stories about Elvis and so few stories about Priscilla Presley. I found the emotion to be very raw and realistic. I loved the cinematography in this movie. It was just gorgeous to look at. I found myself just incredibly moved by the story and just gripped to the screen in every single moment. Truly a staple in Coppola's catalog. Up next is the film Scrapper from director Charlotte Regan. This is a movie that I did not hear a lot of people talk about, despite starring Harris Dickinson, who has become incredibly popular over the past couple years as an actor. But this is about a young girl who lives by herself after her mother passes away. She does an incredible job at like tricking social services to make her think that she's living with a relative, and her estranged father comes back into the picture, and it is about the relationship between those two after the mother has passed away. It's incredibly hilarious. I was surprised by how funny it was. I just laughed and laughed throughout the entire movie, but it's also emotionally gripping and moving, and I loved that about it. I felt like the emotion between this estranged father and daughter was very realistic, and I think about this movie quite a bit, and I wish more people would see it. Up next is Humanist Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person. This is a movie that it's become very popular recently now that it is widely available in the United States. But this is everything I could possibly want about a vampire movie. It's not so much a straightforward horror film. It's much more thoughtful and engaging about what if a vampire was turned and did not want to drink blood and kill people and was trying to find a more humane way to do it. And I love it. And I think the statement that the film makes on depression and suicidal ideation is incredibly important. It somehow comes across as incredibly charming while also emotionally gripping. And there's just so many things to love about this movie, and I'm so glad that it's readily available now for more people to watch because it's really great. Up next is the film How to Have Sex. This movie was very emotionally moving and very poignant. It's about a group of young women who go on summer vacation together, and it's about the experience they have staying on this resort with this group of guys that they run into. And I feel like this movie speaks on the experience of so many women when it comes to men being manipulative emotionally, taking advantage of young women, essentially like forcing women to have sex who do not want to. All of these very difficult subject matters that are incredibly saddening and disheartening, but are also very realistic to the experience of so many women. And this movie, like as I was watching it, I was just completely and totally in awe of what they were able to convey in a way that I feel like could resonate with any viewer that's watching the film. I hope more people check this movie out because it is an underrated gem. Up next is the movie Sometimes I Think About Dying, starring Daisy Ridley. This is one of the most raw, realistic portrayals of depression and isolation and loneliness that I've ever seen. Daisy Ridley gives an incredible performance. The cinematography is mind-blowing. Like there's so many incredible shots in this movie that my jaw was on the floor at what the director was able to do here. It's truly moving emotionally. As someone who's dealt with depression my entire life, I just felt like the movie was speaking to me directly in so many different ways. And it's just a very incredible film that I'm glad is seemingly getting talked about more now. Up next is Love Lies Bleeding from director Rose Glass. This is a super fun, sexy, stylized thriller that I didn't know what to expect after Saint Maud, but this movie was very different, but in a very good way. Two incredibly compelling performances, a story that I don't think anyone would expect coming. The movie goes in a very like fantastical realism direction in the third act that I appreciated a lot as the movie went on. I couldn't believe that it wrapped up the way that it did. Just a really incredible film that people need to check out. Up next is The First Omen. This is one of my favorite horror movies of the decade so far. I feel like it was really kind of honing in to a lot of the things that I love about horror films from the late 1970s and the early 80s. Very stylized. The cinematography was incredible. The lead performance in this movie was just out of this world. I feel like so much of the horror in this movie was less about jump scares and more about really focusing on an image or focusing on you as an audience member to stare at something truly horrifying. It's a movie that I haven't stopped thinking about since I watched it, and it's gonna be a horror movie that's in my regular rotation for years to come. Up next is The Substance from Coralie Farge. I feel like everything about this movie that's been said has been said, but it is incredible. I'm so glad that it got recognition at the Oscars because it was very deserving. Two phenomenal lead performances, incredible cinematography, phenomenal practical effects, which, as you know, I am a huge practical effects guy. I would rather see practical than CGI. And I think the movie really tackles ageism in a way that's very poignant and engaging, and that I think a lot of people took a lot away from, despite the fact that the third act goes in a wild, bonkers body horror direction. Just a really fun and engaging movie that I'm looking forward to revisiting multiple times in the future. And then last up on the list, this should surprise no one, but Jane Schoenbrun's I Saw the TV Glow. I am still blown away by what Jane was able to pull off in this movie. They are such an incredibly talented director. This movie has phenomenal lead performances, beautiful cinematography, one of my favorite soundtracks to any movie in the past like 20 years. And it's such an amazing story about the trans identity and the trans experience. And I hope to see a lot more movies created about the trans experience over the next several years, especially with what trans people are dealing with in the United States of America right now. It's just a really beautiful piece of art that I'm so glad to see is resonating with so many people. I think the last 10 minutes of this movie is truly just haunting. Like, I cannot get the last 10 minutes of this movie out of my brain. I think about it like once a week. It's just a truly beautiful film that so many people need to see. So what are some of your favorite films directed by women this decade? Let me know in the comments. I could have done a lot more in this, but I wanted to try to keep the video in like a 20-minute span, and I hope that you'll check some of these out if you haven't seen them before. As always, if you like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.